Excellencies, ambassadors, permanent representatives, ladies and gentlemen, the Middle East is currently experiencing significant political, economic, and social upheaval, which has generated a number of humanitarian crises and dramatically increased human suffering and vulnerability. These crises are mostly man-made and can be solved only through political solutions coupled with firm international commitments to mitigate and address their impact. In particular, humanitarian issues in the region cannot be dealt with in isolation from other developmental and resilience concerns, since their impact has widespread effects over host communities, institutions, and systems. The Syrian crisis is not only a refugee issue, it is also a national resilience issue, particularly for Syria's neighbors who together have absorbed nearly 4 million refugees in addition to the spillover from the crisis that has wrought havoc on the entire region. In Jordan, we are pioneering the institutionalization of the response within a national framework in order to more effectively and efficiently address both the immediate term impacts of the crisis while also investing in longer-term resilience building. What started in Jordan as an emergency camp management operation in 2011 and 2012 has evolved into a protracted crisis affecting nearly every sector and influencing most aspects of life in Jordan. Jordan's population has increased by 20%, and some 80% of the 628,160 Syrian refugees registered with UNHCR settled in urban areas in some of the country's poorest towns and cities, causing rents to increase by up to 300% in some areas. After 5 years in asylum, even the best off refugees are running out of savings. According to a recent UNHCR assessment, some 86% of refugees are now living below the national poverty line, while 6% of refugee households live in abject poverty, less than $40 per month per person. Syrian workers have saturated the informal labor sector, which make up 44% of Jordan's domestic businesses, driving down wages and ramping up social tensions. The number of Syrian refugee school children in Jordan has risen to 141,000, up from 121,000 at the start of the year. But many school-age refugee children remain still outside classrooms. Schools are suffering from shortages of qualified teachers, and there are concerns about declining quality as a result. The demand on the public sector continues to grow, and the increased burden on the Ministry of Health facilities has affected access and the quality of care. Over 707,000 Syrian refugees accessed the Ministry of Health clinics and hospitals in 2014 alone. Health services are stretched to the limit, some medicines running out, and long eradicated diseases are reappearing. Jordan is one of the most water-scarce countries worldwide. Demand for water has increased by 20% nationally and 40% in the north since the breakout of the crisis. The great proportion of renewable surface water has been utilized. Groundwater is being unsustainably exploited, and the remaining usable sources are gradually diminishing. Hosting over 1.4 million Syrians has also heavily impacted Jordan's fiscal position, exacerbating pressure on public finances, increasing government expenditure on subsidies for bread, water, electricity, and gas, and further inflating the budget deficit. Trade has been severely disrupted by the loss of the country's main trans-regional trade routes through Syria, impeding Jordan's access to major export markets in Europe. While trade with Iraq, which previously accounted for 20% of total exports, has fallen by almost 90%, leading to an additional revenue loss of over $1.4 million per day. The overall financial impact to date of the direct and indirect costs of the crisis on Jordan is estimated to be in the range of $7.9 billion. This is excluding the cost of humanitarian or resilience interventions and accounts for the additional expenditures in education, health, subsidies, and income losses suffered by the government of Jordan since the beginning of the crisis. The protracted nature and magnitude of the crisis cannot be met by traditional aid responses and coordination mechanisms. In situations where the great majority of refugees are living in urban areas and accessing services alongside Jordanians, the type of life-saving emergency support and humanitarian assistance is designed to provide is neither sustainable nor sufficient. Recognizing this, the Jordanian government is spearheading a resilience-based response that brings together humanitarian and development efforts in a single national framework to benefit both refugees and host communities. The Jordan Response Plan, or JRP, is a groundbreaking initiative that aims to address some of the biggest challenges of transitioning from relief to development. It does this by bridging the gap between humanitarian aid as rapid response measure in crisis situations and more medium and long-term development action. The aim of the resilience-oriented programming is twofold. First, to ensure that the shocks and stresses do not lead to a long-term deterioration in the well-being of particular individual, household, system, or institution. And secondly, to build capacity to absorb future shocks and deal appropriately with related stresses. In case of the Syrian crisis, meeting refugee needs and supporting resilience go hand in hand. Currently, the required US $2.99 billion in the JRP is extremely underfunded, reminding all of us of the appeal that Jordan issued at the recent Kuwait pledging conference. Only 12% of the required US $1.9 billion has been received for the refugee and resilience programmatic support elements of the JRP, while we are working with donors on additional pledges and commitments, which at best will not exceed a third of the total JRP needs for 2015. The international community has long called for greater coherence between these two spheres. This initiative is a collective endeavor, and as Mr. Callan has highlighted, one which the international community holds a joint responsibility to deliver. In the past, there has been a tendency for stakeholders to pursue their own agendas, rather than a collective action and alignment behind a common analysis, vision, and plan of action. In order to more effectively and efficiently respond to the unprecedented humanitarian and development challenges that Jordan is facing, the international community should act in accordance with the Paris Declaration principles, align behind the objectives laid out in the Jordan Response Plan, and harmonize their procedures with the governments in order to ensure maximum efficiency and effectiveness. The UN country team's realignment of the traditional UN Development Assistance Framework to the United Nations Assistance Framework under the leadership of the UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator is a prime example of the type of harmonization we are working towards. We encourage donors to review their own aid classification systems in order to enable funds to be channeled towards resilience programs. The compartmentalization of aid between humanitarian and development assistance has resulted in pipelines aid, and there is an urgent need to create more flexibility between humanitarian and development financing. Despite the generosity exhibited by donors at the third Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria and Kuwait, the crisis response in host countries remain dangerously underfunded. With the third International Conference on Financing for Development in Addis Ababa on the horizon, all options to support countries hosting refugees on behalf of the international community should be employed, reminding all of Jordan's call on improving the eligibility criteria for vulnerable middle-income countries to access development assistance and cheaper and innovative financing. This includes increasing sufficiently financial support provided to fund the Jordan Response Plan, providing preferential concessional terms for accessing untapped funds, swapping loans and relieving debt, softening the term and conditions for both existing and new loans, increasing debt limits. In Jordan, the government has taken a number of steps to reconcile the disjointed aid architecture and strengthen overall transparency and accountability. Together with the UN, we have launched the Jordan Resilience Fund. This multi-partner trust fund provides an accountable, transparent, and cost-effective financial instrument to channel assistance from a range of international partners to the government, UN, and NGOs if required or chosen by any donor. We have also streamlined the project approval process for JRP projects and launched a new financial tracking system to take donor contributions against the plan. The international community can count on Jordan to continue doing its part, but we cannot be left alone in this effort. Let me again remind all of us of the appeal that Jordan launched in the recent Kuwait conference. Thank you, and wishing you successful deliberations in our event today.